Louis Stadlen. I have to start, Louis, by saying I read your book, Acting Foolish, to prepare for tonight, and it is a superb memoir. In fact, it may be my favorite theatrical memoir, almost in the same category as Act One. It's that good.
Well, that's high praise indeed.
That is high praise indeed. It is really good. And I'm hoping that in our conversation, you will be as frank as you are in the book.
Well, you can count on it, Foster.
I can count on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Can we start at the beginning? Your father was an actor and a voiceover artist. Did he encourage you in your acting ambitions? And did you get your interest in acting in theater from within the family?
My mother loved the theater. My father, and she felt that I had a creative bent when I was, 8 years old. My father was less convinced. My uncle, my mother's twin, Cy Chassler, who was the editor of Red Book magazine, found a theater camp for me when I was 14 years old called Gray Gables Theater Workshop. And it was a microcosm of the best aspects of what I would experience in professional theater. And I realized that I had a talent for something. Before then, I had a talent for nothing. And I also realized that the girls in the camp were paying me much more attention than I had ever experienced. And I thought, well, this seems like something that I should aspire to.
Was there a certain kind of play or certain kind of part that you were drawn to right at the beginning?
At the theater camp or on Broadway?
At the theater camp, when you started to do your own acting.
Yes, my first role was in Anastasia, the Guy Bolton adaptation. It's a melodrama that I believe Joe Anthony was the lead in, and I played Petrovin the artist. And then and we rehearsed for 3 weeks, and then we performed it for a week, and then we did a production of Oklahoma, which was fabulous, that Joe Verlaine choreographed, and I played Will Parker, and it was one of the very few times in my illustrious career that I ever played anybody who was really dumb. The camp was run by Daniel Melnick, not the Daniel Melnick, the producer. He was at one time Billy Rose's general manager, and he was a company manager. I think he was the house manager, as a matter of fact, at the Broadway Theater. And his wife, Carol Melnick, was the grand poobah. And she was very dramatic, and the entire experience was very dramatic.
So, and you knew that was going to be the life for you.
I did. Yes, I did.
Now, after you graduated from high school, wouldn't it have been the next logical step for a well-brought-up Jewish boy to consider going to college? But you didn't do that.
My mother was a college professor. I was a terrible student. Terrible.
Oh, terrible student?
Terrible. The worst. And I had told everybody, the justification for being a terrible student in my adolescence was that I was going to become an actor. So at 17, I enrolled at the neighborhood playhouse with Sanford Meisner, who was a miserable bastard. And you had to get invited back to the second year. And I didn't make the cut. And yeah.
You're unsparing in your book about Sanford Meisner. Unsparing.
Well,
there are people who swear by him.
No, but he was a sadist. He was awful.
He was awful.
He was awful. He just, he just wanted to nip more careers in the bud, and he was very frustrated. Let me give him the benefit of the doubt and say that perhaps I caught him at a difficult time in his life. He was a closeted gay man. He was frustrated. at any rate, getting beyond Sanford Meisner, I was walking in the street, and a friend of mine named Andrew Procopio, who was also not invited back to the neighborhood playhouse, said, "I'm working with somebody who I think you would really like. Her name is Stella Adler, and she's kind of the opposite of Sandy Meisner." And I thought, ooh, the opposite of Sandy Meisner, that sounds good enough for me. And Stella really saved my life because she really taught me something. And she equated the breakdown of text with what side of the political equation are you on? What, how is your character? What part of the puzzle does your character represent? She put it in political terms. And the first time I auditioned, the first time I was in her scene study class, I did the final monologue for The Glass Menagerie, which I was as preposterously wrong for then as I would be now. And when I was finished, and she would sit in this kind of paper mache throne, and she said to me, "You're Jewish?" I said, she said, "You're from Brooklyn?" I said, "No, no, I'm from Queens, actually." She said, "You're nice. You're a nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn, but that's not good enough." And she explained to me that, first of all, I was playing Tennessee Williams and that I had to represent all of the people in the world who had a poetic sensibility. She told me that most people have a material sensibility, and some people think in more abstract terms, and they had a poetic sensibility. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. This is not coming from that school about you have to be real. She taught that if you had talent and you knew what you were doing, you created the illusion of reality. And I've followed through on that for the next 50 years.
I observed some of her classes and got to know her a little bit. Didn't you find her a little grand?
I loved her. I mean,
You
I think I said in my, no, she was, that to me is what the theater should be. Somebody who has size. And that
was her favorite word.
Yeah, always demanding that. And the actors that I, have basically channeled all my life, the Zero Mostels and the Frank Morgans, they all performed with size. And that's what makes me not a terribly good actor on film. I'm all right, but, I'm an accomplished stage actor because Stella, one of the great things that Stella said was, when in doubt, talk loud.
So it was not actor studio at all. She was teaching something else.
Right.
Something else that worked for you. Am I correct that your first professional engagement was touring with Fiddler on the Roof?
Yes.
That's sort of starting at the top, isn't it?
It is. And the person who was playing Tevye was Stella Adler's brother, Luther Adler. And Stella wrote him a letter, which basically said, "I'm sending a nice boy out to you. He's nice, but he's little Meshuggah. I want you to be nice to him because I know what a miserable bastard you could be to a young actor." And so he decided to make my life as miserable as he possibly could. It was a hazing, and he was a fascinating guy. He was not a good Tevye because he refused to steal anything from Zero, who was his good friend. He played him almost like he was a Talmudic scholar, and that certainly wasn't what Tevye is. But at any rate, besides Luther Adler, I had the great honor introduced into the fraternity of being a professional actor by Fivish Finkel, who became kind of a surrogate father and was one of the kindest and most ebullient people that I ever met in the industry.
Now, in your memoir, I think I noted something, but I want to ask you now. I wrote a book on Hal Prince, and I went to his office for more than 35 years. The last time was just a few months before his death. So I really got to know him well over the years. In your chapter on Candide, which I feel was edited, that you took out things that you didn't want to be in there while Prince was still alive. But there is a roiling subtext to that chapter. I gather you were very unhappy with the production of Candide and with Prince's direction. Did I misread something?
No. I edited it not because I didn't want Hal Prince to read anything negative about him. I assumed he wouldn't read it anyway. I didn't want the book to be about grievance. And I didn't get along with him. And I felt that he was hogging all the glory of what was so wonderful about the production. To give you an example, all the leading actors, we were all nominated for Tony Awards, and we didn't win any of them. He won, but we didn't win. And one of the reasons why was because instead of allowing Tony voters to come at individual performances, he gave us an extra performance, a 9th performance on a Sunday night, in which all the Tony Award voters were there watching this single performance. And of course, we were terrible. You know, we were tired and we were nervous because it was like, you know, hoping to win an Academy Award or whatever. I don't know, it's analogous. I found him, he was a guy who, he was a brilliant theater man. And I have to tell you, you know, that I shed a tear when he died, even though we didn't get along. But he only wanted a result. He didn't care about mastering the vocabulary of communicating with actors. So, you know, his style was, I hired you, now go out and do it. And don't give me any problems.
Did you like the environmental staging?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, you know, we knew from the very beginning this was going to go to Broadway if, you know, if it wasn't a complete bomb in Brooklyn. His talent, in my estimation, was he was an artistic producer. Another thing that I didn't agree with, and, you know, Foster, I was 25 years old and kind of an asshole myself, you know. He was attempting to mythologize himself and say that he was the equal of Jerome Robbins and Bob Fosse. They were the big 3 directors of musicals, especially. And I found that preposterous. And I couldn't listen to that album, which is the entire show, libretto included. I couldn't listen to it for 10 years. And it makes me sad because more than most performances that I've given, many people have come to me over the years and said that it was one of the great theatrical experiences. They all said when I was in junior high school, you know.
But it was a terrific production.
Yeah.
It was a great theatrical experience. The way the Broadway theater, I didn't see it in Brooklyn at Chelsea. I saw it on Broadway. And that big theater was transformed into another space, and it was an experience all to itself.
Yeah.
You left it.
It was an unqualified success. It didn't make any money because, but it was an unqualified success.
But you have in your memoir a very memorable observation. You said when Leonard Bernstein came, after he had seen the show, you saw a look of pain in his eyes. Yeah. Did you feel the production had betrayed the original show of Candide?
Musically, yes. You know, when he first came to see it in Brooklyn, he was very generous with his praise and said, "You've made it work. It's never worked before." But then when we did it on Broadway, we had this rinky-dink band, you know, which was separated, you know, into 4 different corners of the environmental stage. And Yeah, I'm sure that he yearned for Hershey K's original orchestrations. His music was downplayed, and it was the libretto and the concept that people fell in love with.
And that was Prince's doing. It was all his. It was his concept.
Another thing I resented about Prince is he wouldn't allow Leonard Bernstein near us. His ego just wouldn't allow having a genius, you know, perhaps contribute to what we were doing.
Now, your first big success on Broadway, and I remember you were the talk of the town in 1970, playing Groucho Marx in Minnie's Boys.
I was for 6 months.
It's what?
But I wrote for 6 months, yeah.
But it was not a happy experience, was it?
Well, no, it was a great experience. It was talk about a learning curve. I had only done Fiddler on the Roof, and that was directed by a genius. I didn't ever work with him because I replaced a year and a half into the run. But it was perfect. It was a musical masterwork. And the Minnie's Boys, everything that they could do wrong, they did wrong. And you know, the dichotomy was they couldn't get it capitalized unless they found a star. And Shelley Winters, who looked a lot like Minnie Marx, the Marx Brothers' mother.
Yes.
She's a wonderful actress in movies. As long as she dies in the film, you know, she gets killed in every single film.
Yeah.
Stabbed, she's choked, she's drowned. She was not up to the challenge of doing a musical comedy. But it was not just her fault. The musical itself, the libretto, whatever conflict there was are the Marx Brothers going to make it in show business, you know? And people were comparing it to Gypsy, but Gypsy, which is also a masterwork, Gypsy wasn't about whether Gypsy Rose Lee was going to become a success. It was about a psychopathic mother, you know. So people so bent over wanting to love Minnie's Boys. It has a very sweet score. It allowed me to integrate the business. I was very close to the other young actors who played my brothers. Two of them died very young. And the problem with it was that I did receive a lot of acclaim, but Clive Barnes, who was the critic of the Times especially, his review was, well, yeah, he's great in this, but maybe he's just some guy they dug up from under a rock who can do a Groucho Marx imitation. So I then had to be vigilant in terms of getting away from it and making sure that, you know, they didn't just think that's all I did.
During the rehearsal process, you report that they told you, we don't want you to be Groucho Marx.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Pat Birch. Oh, brother. He filled a void. We had this terrible director who was fired he was fired the first preview. And by that time, they brought in Stanley Prager, who was a good workman-like director. But it was too late by that time. But we had this first run-through in front of a lot of the backers and stuff. And we scored big, you know, the boys. They all wanted to see us imitating the Marx Brothers. And Shelley was a train wreck. And when it was over, and we thought, oh boy, we've got a long way to go to make this successful. Arthur Whitelaw, the producer, who had only successes up until this time, and Pat Birch, who filled the void for this incompetent director, they said, we want to speak with you, Lewis, afterwards. And I thought, this is it. They're putting my name above the title. It's going to be Winters and Louis J. Stadlen, starring. And I came out and they said, we have a problem with the show. I said, that's right. She said, do you know what the problem is? And I thought, yeah, I know what the problem is, but maybe I should just shut my mouth and let them tell me what the problem is. And they said, the problem is that you're playing the part too much like Groucho Marx. I said, but I'm playing Groucho Marx. No, no, we hired you because your essence is like Groucho Marx. The audience will be repelled if they think you're imitating Groucho Marx. I said, well, I understand that. And I think there's no one who would be more critical of a caricatured impression of Groucho Marx, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm layering it. I'm finding ways to incorporate his mannerisms. I'm starting as a 14-year-old, and then at the end, I become the recognizable persona of Groucho Marx. No, no. I said, well, then when can I play Groucho Marx? And Pat Birch said, the last minute of the show. I said, the last minute of the show. And up until that time, I can't play Groucho Marx. And I tell you, they were such phonies, the director and her, that they insisted that we not see any Marx Brothers movies. Can you imagine? I mean, you were dealing with, I suppose, all the components that turn a play into a flop.
But when it opened, you were Groucho Marx, and people loved seeing that version of Groucho Marx on Broadway.
Well, when Pat Birch and this other guy got fired, Stanley Prager and Mark Bro, two pros, 9 to 5 directors, they weren't into this bullshit. They knew that they had a lot of work on their hands, and they appreciated the fact that the strength of the show and the goodwill towards the show was because people wanted to see a story about the Marx Brothers.
And they want to see the Marx Brothers on the stage.
Yes, I have to tell you, we did a lot of publicity for the show, and we were on the Dick Cavett show. All the boys, Shelley, and the real Groucho Marx, who was utterly brilliant. He had such intellectual flair, and he was so confident. And when it was over, and I had done my audition routine, which got me the job. And when it was over, the producer of the Dick Cavett show said to me, he said, I don't know who you sound like more, Groucho Marx or Phil Rizzuto.
Was Groucho pleased with what you did in the part? Did he ever tell you?
He loved me. I had a very special relationship with him. And as a matter of fact, my son, his middle name, Groucho would say, when you have a son, name him after me. Well, I wasn't going to name him Julius, his first name, but my son's name is Peter Julius Stadlen. Oh. And he would come to everything that I was in.
Really?
Everything that I was in. And, what I'm going to do is say something that's politically incorrect, but it's what Groucho would say to me. The first time he came to see me, I was in a wonderful production of The Time of Your Life that starred Henry Fonda and Gloria Graham was in it, and Victor French. He was fabulous. And I played Harry the Hoofer, the part that was originated by Gene Kelly. And the role is that he only wants to be a comedian, and he's the world's worst comedian, but he's a very gifted dancer. So I was doing a lot of Joe Verlaine steps, as a matter of fact. And Groucho came up backstage and he said to me, you dance very well for a faggot. And every single time he would see me in a play, he would, you act very well for a faggot. And that was his calling card.
He was not politically correct.
God. Oh, we wouldn't know who he was. Yeah.
Why did they keep Shelley Winters when she was obviously not doing it? Couldn't they get another?
They fired her.
They did.
But they couldn't buy her out. Abe Burrows, who was Abe Newborn, who was my agent and her agent, they said, she'll leave, but you have to pay her a year's worth of her contractual salary. And they just didn't have the money at the time. We ran in previews. We set the record for running in previews. They couldn't open. I think 84 performances in previews, 82 after the official opening night.
Now, your next Broadway show was a big deal too. Sunshine Boys, Neil Simon, directed by Alan Arkin. That was a hit. Was that an enjoyable experience?
Absolutely. I mean, I've done 4 Neil Simon plays from scratch in different decades, and Neil has so enriched my life. The thing about it is, there's 2 plays going on. There's the play that Neil wrote, and then there's a kind of an operatic subtext to what was going on in in Neil's life. And at that point, his wife Joan was dying of bone cancer. It was fraught, but I met somebody who Sam Levine. I love Sam Levine so much, and he taught me so much. And he was
But you were warned beforehand that everybody hates Sam Levine, and beware and watch out.
they said that he was very difficult, and he was very difficult because he was incapable of lying or bullshitting about anything, which on any number of occasions he would fall on his own sword because he had such integrity. Uh, he just he was a very difficult man, but he was a darling man, and he was a great actor, and he taught me something very. You get these lessons. That's right. You go to the neighborhood playhouse. You go to the actor studio, and it's all about whatever. Who's as good as Eleanor Duza. Stella Adler said, "When in doubt, talk loud." I had a scene with Sam in which he would get a laugh, and I would be standing just upstage of him, leaning against the table, and I raised my eyebrows like, this guy's, he's old, he's senile, whatever. I reacted off of his joke, and he was furious at me. And he wouldn't talk to me for a week, as a matter of fact. But and I said, "What? I don't know what I did." He said, "You know what I did. You know what you did." I said, "I don't know." He said, "I told the stage manager what you did." I said, "Well, the stage manager never said anything to me," and he didn't. He said, "You're getting a bad laugh." He said, Don't make hay on somebody else's joke. There are good laughs and there are bad laughs, and that's not an earned laugh." And so something like that, you never make that mistake again.
So he was a practical man of the theater.
He was a deeply serious man, very politically involved. And I also took from him, because I think I'm that it takes a serious person to be a good comic actor. And when I was doing the Nance, Frank Rich came backstage and he was talking to Nathan Lane, and he said to Nathan, "Louis Stadlen, did he ever work with Sam Levine?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, in the Sunshine Boys." He said, "That's interesting because over the years, Louis Stadlen seems to have morphed into Sam Levine." And I have to tell you, that's the best review I ever got from him.
I was interested in the female version of The Odd Couple. I wasn't sure how you really felt about it. Did that work, or was it a stunt that didn't quite work?
I thought it was a stunt in the beginning. I was desperate to work. I didn't have a pot to pee in. My marriage was going south. It's funny. I taught at the Stella Adler Studios class about 10 years ago, and I asked them to that was one of the scenes that I said they should try to do. It's very amusing. It was really well performed. The problem with it is that they didn't have the courage to make Rita Moreno, who played the Walter Matthau part, a slob. So she was reasonable and rational at all times. And Sally Struthers, who played the Felix Unger part, she was, this obsessive compulsive. So it lacked that dynamic, but there were a lot of laughs in it. And then, it had quite a cast. Tony Shalhoub, myself, Jenny O'Hara, Mary Louise Wilson, Marilyn Cooper. And I'll tell you, on certain nights, until she got bored, Sally Struthers, I would have paid money to be on that stage with her. She was an extraordinary comedian.
What was it about Neil Simon's writing that is good for actors? Did he have a certain rhythm in the writing, and was there a certain quality in his work that, first of all, drew you to him? You obviously understood his work, and he trusted you to deliver it. But was there's something in the quality of the writing that you found particularly generous for an actor?
Yes, and he, I knew where he lived. We were both Jewish boys from Brooklyn, basically, and it's all rhythm. And when we did the Sunshine Boys, he was at the top of his game, and he knew that he could cut a laugh that he would say, no, 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 that's a 500-person laugh. He said, if we cut that line, I'll write another line, and that will be a 1,200-person laugh. He had this incredible confidence that he had a reservoir of talent in him.
But then when you did some of the later shows, Laughter on the 23rd Floor and 45 Seconds to Broadway are not in the same league as the greatest work.
No, they're not in the same league. Certainly not. I think that Laughter on the 23rd Floor is very underrated. And I'll tell you something, one of the big problems with that is he couldn't write an ending. And I recently was invited to a reading of it. And it has an ending now because at the end, the point that he was making was that television would never be the same. And McCarthyism was one of the reasons that people were getting fired left and right, and television was being censored because of the political time. Well, now we're in that political time again, so that there's a resonance to the last scene of Laughter on the 23rd Floor. Also, it was pretty brilliantly performed. I mean, I've done 8 plays with Nathan Lane, who was a great actor, but that cast was made up of J.K. Simmons and John Slattery and Randy Graff and Mark Lynn Baker. When I say that there's an operatic component to working on Neil's plays, Neil had an ongoing public feud with Frank Rich. Frank Rich was retiring as the drama critic. The last review he was scheduled to write was Laughter on the 23rd Floor. All Neil had to do was postpone the opening a week, and then we would have had David Richards. And David Richards was writing for the Sunday Supplement for the Arts and Leisure. He wrote a very good review of us. But the idea that he wanted to, fight it out with Frank Rich, who we knew loathed him, and we got a bad review, but we got a lot of bad reviews. It was not well received. And then the other play that I had the lead in, 45 Seconds from Broadway, the second day of rehearsal was 9/11, 2002. Our opening night was the night that the American Airlines plane crashed in Far Rockaway, and they thought it was a terrorist attack, and nobody was allowed into Manhattan. So that play was bookended by events.
Bad timing. I want to, there's so many questions I want to ask you, and I'm looking at the clock. I want to talk about 2, actually 3 non-Broadway appearances that I'm really interested in hearing about. And the first you already mentioned, At the Time of Your Life. I don't like that play. I find it a real chore to sit through, but I don't like plays set in ballrooms. However, I want to know all about Gloria Graham, who was one of my all-time favorites. I loved her in movies. She was a great movie star. I don't know how she was on the stage, but she was a great movie star.
She was great. She played Marielle, a woman who drinks. That's how it's described by, and it's a scene isolated from the rest of us. We're all on stage, but it's Henry Fonda and Gloria Graham. And she was a delightful person.
Oh, good.
Yeah, she was a doll, and she was wonderful in it. She traveled with her mother because the mother had to be there so that she didn't get into trouble, I think.
Oh, okay.
But I found her to be a delight.
Did she have stage presence? Could she do it? Did she put it across in the theater?
I thought so. Of course, I was, a few feet away from her. But there was one time we were playing the Studebaker in Chicago. It was Plumstead Playhouse. It was Henry Fonda and Martha Scott came up with this idea, along with Alfred de la Yagra, who was, one of the great gentleman producers, that they were going to create a national theater by putting a play on Broadway for a limited run and then touring it, because the country was so large that that was the only way we could have a national theater. And they did it with On the Town. They did it with a production of Front Page. When we were at the Studebaker, before I came on, I went in the back of the audience, and Henry, if you sat in the first 15 rows, genius. If you were a little farther back, it was diminutive. But talk about another incredible gentleman, and I was so honored to work with him, and he was so kind to all of us.
But you're talking there about the difference between movie acting and theater acting. He was a movie actor, but he always went back to the stage. He was in Mr. Roberts for 2 years, I think. Did you feel his technique was geared more for film, for the camera, than for the?
No, I didn't. I brought this up because that was what I remember. That he was. You caught all of the nuance, all of the subtlety when you were sitting a little closer. But he had the discipline, both disciplines. Many actors can't. You could be a great film actor, and you just can't learn all the lines. And Henry could do both.
He could do both. That you have a credit that many New York people may not know, but I was sure impressed by it. You played in the Price at the Gate Theatre in Dublin.
Yes, and I won the Irish Times Award, which is the Tony Award for Ireland, and I'm the only American ever to win.
Well, that is an accomplishment. Isn't that a great play, Arthur Miller's The Price?
A great play. The other three actors were Irish. Fiona Bell is actually from Scotland, but she lives in Ireland. And Doug Hughes, one of my favorite people and one of my favorite directors, he directed it. It was an unqualified success. People just adored it. And it was a role. I was very disappointed that I didn't get a chance to do it when the Roundabout revived it. But, they hire celebrities.
Did the other actors, did the Irish actors do American accents or attempt to, or did you all keep your own accents?
Well, my accent, of course, was, Jewish, first. My first language would have been Yiddish, So they did their best with the American accents. Fiona Bell, who had the Scottish brogue that when we'd be, talking, sometimes I couldn't understand a word she was saying. It felt like a totally different language. Perfect American accent, perfect. But the other two actors were fabulous, even though, if you wanted to get picky, they didn't sound like they were from Brooklyn, I suppose.
Yeah. But I suppose that production might not have played well in New York, just in terms of accents and presence of the actors.
Only if you wanted to be picky.
Really?
Yes, because it was a complete success. I mean, of the play was these actors really got it, and it was a wonderful experience. And to be in Dublin for 4 months, it was a dream.
And the Irish audiences loved you?
Loved it.
Loved the show. Loved everything.
Loved me. When you say that, I was. Minnie's Boys, I had my 6 months, of being the flavor, But I was the toast of Dublin. It was unbelievable. They were writing, magazine articles about me. It was sweet. It was lovely.
I want to talk about, you mentioned you're not a great film actor. You didn't do a lot of film, but you did appear in some important films, and you worked several times with Sidney Lumet, who's a great film director. I
Right.
know you give him full credit as that. Is he great with actors as well?
Because he's from the theater. And also, when I was 19 years old and joined the National Company of Fiddler on the Roof, I played Mendel the Rabbi's son. And the man who played the rabbi was Borja Lamet, Sidney's father.
Oh.
Yeah. Sidney was the bratty kid in George Washington Slept Here. Uh, he was a great director. And what he did was, if you had a large enough part, you were included in, he rehearsed the film like a play. We went down to the Michael Bennett studios, and for 2 weeks, we just kept running through the play. And I preferred that, you know. I've done 14 movies. What I mean to say is, the really, really good actors on film, they reveal their soul in front of the camera. I never felt comfortable enough, you know, uh, to get really good at it. But you know, my performances are not, you know, terrible, but they're. I feel
Was
I'm accomplished at one thing and not accomplished at the other.
did Paul Newman do that? You worked with him in The Verdict. Did he reveal his soul in front of the camera?
Absolutely, every second. Sure, he's a great star. You know, I'll tell you a story. I had a great scene with him, and Sydney. It was mostly a master shot, and it was like a 5 or 6 minute scene, in which it would start in a locker room, and we shot it at the in Boston at City Hall. It was supposed to be a hospital, and I had 95% of the dialogue. And I'm Dr. Gruber, the man who convinces him to take on the case, which was what the film was about. And then we walk downstairs, we go through hallways, but I have all his dialogue, you see. And he, you know, every once in a while interjects a sentence or two. And when it was over, we did it 2 or 3 times. Sidney said, "Okay, that's fine. We're not going to do any close-ups." And I went, "Whew, that's a relief." And Paul looked at me like I was insane, because his entire life is close-ups.
Good. But you didn't want the close-ups.
I didn't want to do it again, you know. I didn't want to screw it up.
Now, you write in a way that I think would surprise people, but being directed by Mel Brooks and To Be or Not to Be was not a happy experience.
No, it wasn't.
He was not Sidney Lumet as a director.
He didn't even admit that he was directing it. He was so sensitive to the fact that we were doing, you know, a redo of Ernst Lubitsch's To Be or Not to Be, which is a gem, which is perfect, with Jack Benny and Carole Lombard. It was her last film.
It's a great film.
Great film. And he's so heavy-handed, you know. I mean, yeah, he's done great stuff, you know, no question about it. But it's balls to the walls comedy, you know, while the other was the Lubitsch touch, all right? So he was aware that he was going to get creamed by the critics if he was the director. So he credited Alan Johnson, the choreographer, wonderful choreographer, as being the director. But Mel was the director. But the conceit on the set was Mel isn't really the director. But then Mel would come on and direct and drive everybody crazy. And it was not a happy experience for him, because I think he was aware that he couldn't touch Jack Benny's performance. So I've worked with Mel a lot. I did the producers for Mel. When things are going well, Mel is a pussycat. And when things are going badly, it brings out the worst in him.
I don't know anything at all about television. I never saw The Sopranos and I never saw Benson, but I was interested in what you had to say about both of them in your book. Benson sounds like a nightmare from beginning to end. It sounds like you had a season in hell, and the hell was Los Angeles and the television industry.
I I didn't sign my 7-year contract until the fifth show. They came to me and they said, "Well, you haven't signed the contract." I said, "Yeah, yeah," because I went to my agent, Susan Smith, and I said, "How do I get out of this?" She said, "Why? It's a hit." I said, "I don't care. They could tear me apart, but I'm not getting over the Rockies to do the second year. I hate this." Uh, I was, cast as this asshole. It was not clever writing. Uh, and there was an element of disingenuousness about the entire experience. And I thought, if I do this, I'll get typed as this character for the rest of my life. I didn't realize that that's what most actors want. They want to get typed so that they can just, people can go to them because they know this is who we need. We need a Larry Gates type. This is I heard a casting director say through the wall at the Goldwyn Studios. I was outside waiting to go in an audition. She said, I need a Larry Gates type, but I don't want an $8,000 Larry Gates. I want a $1,500 Larry Gates. And I thought, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
This is too tough without it, that becoming the common denominator.
Was Sopranos a happier experience?
Oh, yes. So they were great. And everybody was aware that it was the best gig of their lives, and the writing was fabulous, and the production values. It was like you were doing a movie every week. And James Gandolfini, the kindest, most generous man, just as a civilian, but also as an actor. I was shocked at how much he gave when he wasn't on camera.
Now, you've done lots of touring shows, and you enjoy being out of town in long runs.
My favorite.
If you love doing that. But I'm interested in, you did the Producers long run, you did Nathan Detroit and Guys and Dolls for a long time. And then very recently, you were Horace Vandergelder out of town in Hello Dolly.
Yes, for a year, the first national company of Hello
First
Dolly.
national company.
Right.
Do you like doing the show where you have not been, you're not the original creator of the part? Does that bother you?
No, it doesn't bother me. Well, first of all, let's go back to Nathan Lane's performance in as Nathan Detroit. I thought he was wonderful. I stole from him. I channeled Sam Levine. The thing that an actor doesn't really understand is they're not such a good mimic. Your essence comes out. Nobody thinks that you're imitating anybody. It's just a composite of, it's an amalgam of all the great character actors that I grew up with. I was a terrific Nathan Detroit, and in a perfect world, I would still be playing Nathan Detroit on the road. I tell you, I loved it. Being surrounded by, it was a
You
great.
never got tired of doing it.
I didn't, and the scenery was beautiful, and of course Frank Less's score. And I think that musical says more about the relationships between men and women, and it's downright profound, right? Then I did the Producers, and again I stole from Nathan, channeled Zero, and didn't, I was Max Bialystock. I didn't have worry that, didn't feel that I was competing with Nathan. Hello Dolly was different. I saw it on Broadway. I didn't care for it. I thought that...
Which production? The Bette Midler production?
Bette Midler production. I didn't think Bette played Dolly. I thought she was playing her own self, which was antithetical to who Dolly Levi should be. And I thought that David Hyde Pierce, who was a wonderful actor, was miscast. I had done the role of Horace Vandergelder first in The Matchmaker with Andrea Martin. I was a little young for it at the time, but I knew who the guy was. Then I did it at the Muni with Randy Graff playing Dolly, and I did it in Houston with Leslie Uggams, and I did it in Boca Raton with my dear, dear love Leroy Reams, who had directed me in these other productions, and he did it in drag.
Oh,
And he was wonderful, and he didn't send it up at all. There was nothing camp about it. So now I'm doing it, and it's the 7th time I'm working. Well, to go back, I was extremely disappointed that I didn't get to do it on Broadway. I thought it was a no-brainer. I had done it 7 times. I had worked with Jerry 7 times. I had gotten fabulous reviews. People were saying in other productions that I was the best Van de Gelder since Davy Burns, who incidentally I played many, many roles originated by the great David Burns. So I was very disappointed. And when I got the chance to do it with Betty, I guess I had I'll show you who's the best Horace Van de Gelder. But I loved doing it. And I loved working with Betty, who, I had a certain amount of trepidation. She can be difficult. I never for 1 second had any problems with Betty, and I thought that she was wonderful in the role. She had tremendous gravitas when she was speaking to Ephraim, her late husband. She was funny. She's not funny in real life, but she's such a good actress that she embraced who that character was and was funny. And I loved doing it. However, as much as I love the road, there's a difference between a 73-year-old actor and a 56 or a 49-year-old actor. It's exhausting. And by the time my year was up and half of the cast left and we were replaced by other people, I'd had it.
You didn't want to go on with it. But did you feel your touring production was better than the production on Broadway?
Yes, I do. Because I think that, look, one of the reasons I love the road, because they go away, the director and the choreographer, they go away, and you can, have some freedom, and then they'll come back, and then they'll give you a pain in the ass. But Jerry's very controlling. He's a very controlling director, and he has, I think, perfect comic pitch. He's extremely talented, but he could drive you a little crazy, Yes, I thought our production was about what Hello Dolly is really about, which is love, which is the idea that these people there was the possibility that they could find love within a 24-hour period. That's what the play is about. I thought there was something mechanical about the Broadway show, but then again, look, it had to be pretty great for me to like it because I wanted to play that part.
Yes. So it didn't rise to that level. Okay. I've asked you so many questions. I think it's time for some of our listeners to have a chance to ask Louis a question. Have questions, Mark?
Before we fully open up, since you evoked his name, Leroy Reams is here. So Leroy, do you would like to say something?
That's not Leroy.
No, he's there. You got to unmute Leroy. All right. Well, we'll open it up to anybody else.
Leroy, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm muted.
He's unmuted.
Is Leroy unmuted?
No, he's still talking. Leroy Hun, you need to unmute yourself.
You got to click it where it says move it around your face.
Because we've not heard a word you said. Start over.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
There we go. You didn't hear what I said before?
No.
Louis was and is the best Horace Van de Gelder. I know I played opposite and also directed him. He was a delight. But also doing the producers, he was also, for my taste, the best Max Bialystock because Nathan Lane is brilliant, but you knew he would never fuck the old lady to get the check. Louis would have fucked the old lady to get the check, and that's why he was brilliant doing it.
So if you have questions, open your mics, try to not step on each other, and let's see what we've got. Go ahead.
Louis, I saw you opening night in Minnie's Boys, March 26, 1970, and you were fantastic. And of course, Groucho came on stage with you and did a little walk. It was you must have felt like you were in heaven that night, I'm sure, right? To have Groucho there on stage with you doing the walk. And you towered over Groucho. You looked Lilliputian almost to you.
It was a thrilling moment, no question about it. And I was equally thrilled when they didn't have any money for an opening night party at a reputable restaurant. So they had the opening night party was at a Chinese restaurant. But before that, with my parents, I walked into Sardi's. And that was the era in which the Stadlen applauded.
Wow.
And from that moment on, Sardi's has become one of my very, very special places.
And when you were in To Be or Not to Be, do you remember working with Henry Brandon?
Yes, I do.
Because I think he's in the scene where he arrests you and the gay character. Any memories of Henry Brandon?
Well, if I'm thinking of the right person, I think he was in the original To Be or Not to Be, was he not?
I'm not sure. He probably played roles like that in the 40s. You know, I know he was Fu Manchu and Barnaby and all that. But he comes in, I remember seeing it, and he has a great close-up. He's the SS guy, and you're backstage with you're the Jewish character doing the Star of David on yourself. And I think he just had that one scene, but he was brilliant.
Don't have any recollection.
Okay.
And Louis Bob, who was just speaking, just did the
Louis?
Sunshine Boys at the Lambs.
Yeah, we did Sunshine Boys.
Ah,
I was
it was
just
great.
when you did the producers, because I was watching an old Tony broadcast with David Merrick on it, and I thought, when you did the producers, did you try to channel any of David Merrick into your character?
the mustache. Susan Stroman, the choreographer / director, she wanted everything to be just like Nathan Lane did. And she said to me, second week of rehearsal, the mustache. I want you to cut the mustache.
Nice.
I said, why? I said, there's David Merrick, and we're going to be playing 2,000-seat theaters. You know, my face will be more interesting if people can stare at a mustache. So we kept the mustache. Yeah. But Merrick, it was Zero. Zero's perform. Nobody will ever be better than Zero. When I went to see on Broadway, Nathan was channeling Zero himself, and then I channeled Zero and I channeled Nathan. And that's who I am. I am an amalgam of every contract player that ever earned a living in Hollywood in the 30s.
We have a question from Karen Culp online. What is the funniest moment you ever experienced on stage, and were you able to keep from breaking character?
Well, since Leroy Reams is in the list, and nobody go up like Leroy Reams. I mean, when Leroy goes up, there's a look on his face in which it's not that he doesn't know what to say next. He can't remember what play he's in, all right? And we were doing the producers, and he was playing Roger Debris, the director, that for the entire scene, I'm trying to entice him to direct the worst musical that there will ever be, Springtime for Hitler, and he keeps saying, no, he doesn't want to do it. And there's a big, long musical number about me trying to convince him to direct the show. And one night, it was the opening night in Fort Lauderdale, and I turned to him and I said, oh, Roger, won't you do it? And Leroy took a long pause and went, all right, yeah, I'll do it. Do it. I said, don't you want to talk to your assistant? Are you sure you want to do it, Roger? No, I'll do it. And I looked down at the conductor. There was no reason to do the song, and it was a long song. So I got a note from the conductor, and I slammed my foot against a couch, and I had to go to the orthopedist the next day, and I started screaming, "He'll do it! He'll do it!" The upshot is, Leroy won the Carbonell Award for that performance, and all the critics were there that night. And he received, reviews like, well, at least he was spontaneous. I can't say that for the rest of the cast.
Any other questions from anybody who's logged in? Come on out.
Do you remember doing Olympus on My Mind? It was kind of like a pseudoless type of thing, but you were brilliant in that. Olympus on My Mind. Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure. I remember what meal I had, in Omaha, Nebraska in 1968. Yeah, no, I remember it. Yes, it was fun. It was a good show. It had a wonderful score and wonderful people. And Ron Raines, who was the lead, Ron Raines is one of my closest friends to this day. He was the best man at my second marriage wedding.
Magda, you have to unmute.
Unmute.
First of all, I loved your book. Everybody should read the book. It is, I laughed out loud, especially the scene with Fivish Finkel and the other, I think, Sidney Lumet's father.
Yes.
That scene should be in a movie. I thought it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. When did you write the book?
I started writing it the last few months of the producer's tour. Leroy and I took out the first national. Then 9 months into the run, I was transferred to New York. I did it there for 6 months and then went back on the road. And this was kind of the dying days of the producers. We were playing a lot of one-weekers. And I started writing. And an actor by the name of Michael McCormick, we were talking in his dressing room. And I mentioned something that I wanted to write. And he said, he said, that's a good story. What exactly did he say? Something about I understood that I only root for losers. That was what I had written. And he said, that's a good title for your book. So once I realized that that's what I was going to write about, the fact that it's the imperfection, the grotesquerie of good people who are in the theater. Those are the people that I find interesting. And the idea of rooting for the Yankees, never, can't do. But I'll root for the underdog under every circumstance. So when I was finished with the book, I realized I only root for losers is not a good enough title. It's too negative. And so I came up with Acting Foolish.
Any other questions?
Pat?
If you could go back in time, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, if you could go back in time with all of the things that you described and in the book, and you said when you were very young, in Brooklyn, Queens, let's say, is there a particular aspect to your career that you would say, this is what I think I will focus on, with what you know now?
No, I don't think I would have done anything differently. I can look back and I could say, with the knowledge and the quasi-wisdom that I have now, I would have dealt with Hal Prince differently. I can recognize where I got in my own way, and I can recognize where I then became somebody who I would consider generous to work with. No, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change anything, as a matter of fact. I certainly wouldn't change leaving Benson after the first year. When I was a kid, I would listen to the cast albums of My Fair Lady and Guys and Dolls and How to Succeed in Business and a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, and I've done all those shows. So I feel like I've had a blessed career. I realized very early on that I didn't want to be a star, and I don't know if I am star material. I'm just very, very good actor material, you know. For many, many years, I would channel people because I didn't know I had a personality. And then after a while, when you get to be about 45, you accept who you are, more or less. You don't want to be somebody else. But I must say that the second half of my career has been the happier, more fulfilling section of my career.
Great, thank you. That's very good answer. Thank you.
All right, I've got a question from Alexandra Nader. Did you like the show Fosse? Was it realistic?
My wife was in Fosse, so I saw it many times. Oh, wait a second. You're talking about the TV show Fosse, right? That's what you're talking about? Yes, that's what she must be talking about,
Yeah.
not the Broadway review of Fosse's work. I never saw it. I was on the road with Hello Dolly, and I'm technologically challenged, so I never saw it.
Pat Addis, you have a question?
Yes, I do. I knew your father. I worked with Alan Swift, and he was amazing. He was Popeye, but he was also on a commercial that I did where he played Grandpa Stroman, and he was the king of voiceovers. Did you ever get into voiceovers at all?
I did a little. I never succeeded very well at it. And I think part of it was I just didn't, that was my dad's, you know, franchise. That was his province. And he did many other, I mean, he wrote a Broadway play and starred in it. He did a lot of regional theater. He did a number of Broadway shows, but that's where he made his name, was children's television and voiceover. So I think I had a resistance to it. I didn't want to compete.
Well, I loved working with him.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Great guy, true Renaissance man, and a wonderful father. A wonderful.
That's good.
Yeah, I could never have lived a useful life if it wasn't for him, his guidance, and you know, we had our disagreements, that's for sure. But he encouraged me greatly.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
All right, I think
Thank you very much.
I think I'll ask the final question, and that is, what is on the horizon? Do you have anything in the works going forward?
I'd like to walk out of my apartment. That would be a good.
Join the club.
Yes, there is. I was going to do Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman at the Flint Repertory Theater. We were supposed to go into rehearsal in August. Obviously, that's not going to happen. Then it was moved to November. Of course, that's not going to happen. Then it was moved to, you know, December. That's not going to happen. And it's not that I don't think that I'm not age appropriate to play that part, but you have to have a lot of vitality to do that part. So I'm 73 now. I hope the opportunity doesn't come up, you know, when I'm 77, you know, depending on this pandemic. That's the one thing. But I will tell you this, and you know, it's a convenient time to feel that you're semi-retired, but I'm not in the mood to be proactive at this stage of my life. I don't think that I have to prove anything. If somebody says we must have Louis Stadlen to be in this play, and I think it's a worthwhile project, I'll do it, of course, but I'm not going looking anymore. So I guess that's the definition of being semi-retired.
Okay, great. Well,
Can I make an announcement?
Mark, could I just end
please, Foster.
with, I just want to hold the book up. It is really beautifully written. You're a wonderful storyteller. You're a very good analyst of other people. Unsparing, I mean, you're tough. You don't let anybody get away with anything. But the candor and the honesty are refreshing. And I think the interview, as all of our listeners would probably agree, was absolutely fabulous. And if you want more of it, read this fabulous book. It's available right away on Amazon, and you will not be able to put it down. And Louis did not pay me to say this. This is my own inspiration. Terrific book. I haven't stopped talking about it.
Thank you.
Can I make an announcement?
Let me finish
Our
up.
next one?
let me finish up, and then you certainly can.
Go ahead.
So first of all, thank you, Foster, a great friend of the Lambs, another good interview, and mainly to our guest, Lewis, to this wonderful time. Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And thank you, Magda.
And this will get posted.
Thank
in
you,
the next-
Magda.
And
the
thank
next-
you, Joe Big.
About
Yeah.
24 hours, this will get up on the Lambs website, and it'll also be up on our YouTube channel. So check it out if you missed any part. Share it with your friends. And again, when we reopen the world, we hope some of you will visit the Lambs. And then I will turn it over to Magda to talk about upcoming events.
Okay, our next event will be June 17th with Lainey Kazan at 7 p.m. And then June 22nd with Todd Fisher, Debbie Reynolds' son. And he wrote a wonderful book. If you get a chance to read it, I just read it over the weekend. It's very heartwarming about Debbie Reynolds. You really get to know her. So we look forward to Foster being on board with us. So
Great.
please tune in. We'll send you the email and hope to see you.
This was a wonderful
Thank
evening.
you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Louis.
Much success.
See you at Sardi's in a decade.
And good to see Leroy.
hope
We've
so.
seen you at the Lambs, and all of you stay well. And tune in
Thank
next
you,
time.
Shepard.
Yes.
Sei gesund.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Louis. Thank you.
Thank you.